Well, everybody must have heard I was doing the introductions today. My name is Clay Hupmacher, and it's my honor to introduce Chief Warrant Officer 4 retired Mike Durant, who's going to speak to us today about the actions of Task Force Ranger in the Battle of Mogadishu on October 3rd, 1993. Mike entered military service in 1979 as an enlisted radio intercept operator. After a tour in Panama, he went to flight school in 1983, with his first assignment being a 377th Medevac company out of Korea. Always one in every crowd. After that, he was assigned to Fort Campbell at Bravo Company 101st Aviation Battalion and Kingsman, I believe.
Yes.
And then was assessed and selected for assignment into the 160th in Delta Company, 1st of the 160th Special Ops Aviation Regiment, and served there as a what we call a DAP, a direct action penetrator armed MH-60 aircraft as a flight lead. He was there in the company through 1993, and then following the actions in the Battle of Mogadishu, took over duties as a 160th simulations officer, running multiple simulation devices for our aircraft. Retired in 2001, and now is the CEO of Pinnacle Solutions, if I got that right, that works aviation training simulation type issues out of Huntsville, Alabama. Mike was involved in Operations Prime Chance in the Persian Gulf, which involved the reflagging of the U.S. Kuwaiti tankers to U.S., Operations Just Cause, Desert Storm, and then Gothic Serpent. His awards include the Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Purple Heart, the POW Medal, and 3 Air Medals, among others. He's got a Bachelor of Science and an MBA from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He's married to the former Lisa DeRoche. They have 6 kids: Joe, Joey, Christopher, Dina, Taylor, and most recently little Michael. So we obviously didn't deploy him enough, or he's had too much time after he got back. Ladies and gentlemen, please War College welcome for Mike Durant.
Well, thank you very much. And I've known Clay for a long time. In fact, I did know you when you were a warrant, right? Okay, so I mean, it goes way back, just after he made the transition from the Marine Corps to the Army. And he's got a lot of dirt on me. And all last night, I was sitting there wondering how much of that is he going to share today. And I appreciate the fact that you chose discretion. And obviously, all the professional training and the leadership training the Army's imparted upon you has paid off in some ways. But he's invited me to come speak to various organizations throughout his career, and it's always a pleasure and an honor. It's great to see you doing so well, and I'm sure you'll continue to serve the Army in great and wonderful ways for many years to come. I have told this story now for 17 years. It's hard to believe. I mean, I don't wake up every day thinking about Somalia, but when I do think about it, to think that it has been 17 years is somewhat humbling. I've told it to audiences from elementary school students to industry people to folks like yourselves, Leavenworth, FBI, ATF, I mean, you name it. Pretty much every flavor of organization has heard this message in some form or fashion. And what's been interesting, and that's, I think, what I'm going to try to bring to light the most today, is that the things that I'm going to talk about, the things that went well and didn't go well in some cases about this particular mission, and on the broader scale, some of the other stuff that we got involved in, are not specific to special operations. They're not specific to the Army. They're not specific to the military. They are pretty much the same things that are going to help me as the president of a company be successful, help you be successful when you're in charge of or a member of an organization. And that's, to me, that's the value in continuing to look at this. We don't continue to look at these things, as you well know, being here and part of this great institution. We don't just do it for the fun of it or to waste time. There are lessons learned. There are things that we can pull out, and I believe it's almost never ending, because the different perspectives that you can bring to the table, different ways that you can look at each of these historical examples, always seem to bring something else to light. We are not a huge audience, but probably too big to do questions during the presentation, so I would ask that you hold them until the end. If my timing is right, we're going to try to keep about 10 minutes or so at the end to go ahead and address any questions that you might have. and I don't have a flight until 5:30. So if you want to hang around and have a cup of coffee and talk about it one-on-one, I'd be happy to do that as well. So with that said, I start every presentation, whether I'm talking to elementary school students or a War College gathering, with this slide, because to me, this is where it has to begin. It's at the crew level. So within an aviation organization, kind of this is where the rubber meets the road. It's where it has to all come together, where the people and the machine interface and have to go out there and do something. And it's different in every type of organization, but this is what matters. People first and foremost, and I'll talk about that more in a second when I get to the next slide. But what this message brings to us is, this is the crew of Super 6-4. This is the aircraft and the people that I was flying with the day that I got shot down. I've been in the Army about 13 years at the time. I've been in Special Operations Aviation for about 5 years, and we've been in Somalia for about 2 months when this photograph is taken. And if you don't know this, in Special Operations Aviation as a warrant officer, I can stay forever. There are guys still there today who were there in Somalia, who were there 5 years before Somalia ever happened, because they bring so much to the battle, they bring so much to that ground force commander that we're supporting, that they're invaluable. So the Army, very wisely, has determined leaving those kind of people in place is the best thing for the Army. It's certainly the best thing for the unit, it's certainly the best thing for the ground customer, but it's also, in the end, I think, the best thing for the Army. So when you spend that much time in one organization with those same people, you develop relationships you don't find anywhere else. I mean, you combine that with the fact that now you're in combat, which I'm sure many of you have either experienced it yourself or spoken to folks who have, takes that relationship issue to another level. I mean, you know each other like the left hand knows the right. So we were about as close as you could be. This crew, I can recall missions where we hardly communicated at all, not because we were angry with each other, but we didn't need to. We knew exactly what the other person in the crew was going to do, because we were at exactly the level of training you want to be, the highest level possible, where you operate as one, not as individuals. Unfortunately, the only surviving member of that crew is with you here today. And to me, that's why we studied this, because there were mistakes made. I don't think there were all that many made at the tactical level. Oh, there's always a few. I mean, there's no perfect games. You're going to throw an interception. You're going to fumble the ball. You're going to throw to the wrong receiver, using some sports analogies. There's no perfect games. But I don't think the game changers occurred at the tactical level. I think the game changers occurred at a much higher level, and we're going to peel back the onion a little bit, and you'll get my perspective on that. Now, I'm not a policy guy, all right? I didn't go to War College. I was a W3 warrant officer, been to flight school, done a few things. This is my 4th combat tour, so I've kind of experienced it and learned it on the go, but I never expected to be on the stage at Carlisle Barracks, okay? I'm here because something occurred that was unanticipated. It's a great quote shared with me a couple of years ago that I've kind of kept in my back pocket that I think tells it all. He said, sometimes you go to the circus and sometimes the circus goes to you. And for me, the circus came to me. I was out there in my aircraft thinking this was just another mission, and then something happened to change my life and change the lives, certainly, of the crew and family members and other members of Task Force Ranger that none of us anticipated. So there's historical significance here, but there's a lot of pieces that, regardless of the number of periodicals, documents, books, whatever, that are out there written, I think we can learn from today. And I hope you have some great questions at the end, because that's always where you seem to bring out some of the new stuff. About 15 years ago, the LAPD asked me to come out there and talk to them about leadership. Again, I haven't had a lot of leadership training in my military career. I, again, sort of picked it up along the way, but I know good leadership when I see it, and I know great organizational effectiveness when I see it. So I sat down in my hotel room and I wrote down the list of things that I thought made the 160th, that unit that I was so proud to be a part of, special. Not just because it has special in its name, but what makes it special? What makes it different for any other organization that I've been in, which I believe is the key to that unit's success. And I'll give you a fact here that if you question how successful that unit is, and I don't know anyone that does, but if you happen to wonder, well, why is it so special? How come you feel so strongly about that? Clay and I were talking last night. The 160th has been in combat in both Afghanistan and Iraq pretty much since the war started. So Iraq, you're talking 8+ years, 9 years, whatever. I don't know exactly. In all those years, flying combat missions almost every day and every night, nonstop, that regiment has only lost 2 soldiers. That is a phenomenal statistic. So when you think about, where did all this lead? What came out of all this? What came out of all the hard work that those plank holders did 30 years ago to put this organization together? It has created that capability that can go out there and fight day after day, night after night, in some of the most challenging conditions against one of the most aggressive and dynamic adversaries that we've ever faced, and after 8 years have lost only 2 aviators. That is a phenomenal statistic. So when you think about the 160, you think about what it takes to get to that level, and 15 years ago, these are the things that I came up with. People, first and foremost. People are the key to success. I mean, we've lived and died by it since the unit was born. There's a long, deliberate assessment process. People are evaluated before they're even allowed to come try out. There's a training program that weeds out even more people, and then once you make it to the unit, just when you think the hard part's over, they treat you like dirt. They don't even talk to you because you're the new guy, and you got to go through 2 years of kind of working your way up the food chain just so somebody will listen to what you might happen to say. And it seems a little brutal, but in the end, the product are the most professional, precise, dedicated warriors that I personally ever flew with. Now, I would put all of our ground customers in that same category, but having not served in those units, I can't speak to it firsthand like I can the 160. So people are the key to success, and I've brought that to my company. When we go to hire new individuals in the company, we don't jump at the first person that meets the qualifications. I mean, we're very deliberate. We're looking for someone that's a cultural fit. We're looking for someone that has the same values that we have. We're looking for someone with the right skills. But in the end, we're more looking for attitude. We're looking for someone who is in sync with the values and the priorities of the company so that they're a cultural fit, not necessarily technically perfect, but more culturally perfect. Because we understand that as the company gets larger, I can't influence every person in the company. I got to have other people around me that can proliferate that same attitude, that same professionalism, all those things that we think are the essence of who we are throughout the organization. So people are absolutely, hands down, the key to success. And again, you could be coaching a football team or running a business or going out there into combat. They're going to be the difference maker, not the equipment. I would argue that in every situation out there. Leadership I put second because I do think it's second. I think it's subordinate to the people. And I think great leaders recognize that. Great leaders realize that they serve the people in their organization. The people in the organization maybe organizationally are under them. However, in their minds, in their attitude, in their actions, in their language, and everything that they do, they portray this, I'm here for you. I'm going to help you be successful. And again, in a business environment, if my engineers are set up for success and they do great work, what makes a company today in this challenging environment is delivering on your programs. If you deliver on time a quality product, the customer's going to come back to you. So the number one thing is perform. And in order to perform, the subordinates and the people at the lower levels within the organization have got to be set up for success. And that's what all of us at the management level in the company, and certainly all the folks that I had experience within the Special Operations Aviation organization, saw it that way. They recognized that they had to empower the people within the organization to make them successful. And as you all recognize, I'm sure, when you do that, you by default become successful because your organization does well, you'll do well. Resources. People can't do it alone. And when we talk about Somalia, which I'm about to do here in 5 minutes or so, this is the culprit. This is where we fall short. And it is controllable. A lot of these things are not controllable, but this one is. And this is why it is so easy to point to some tragic decisions that led to a devastating outcome that, quite frankly, I don't think we'll recover from in my generation. I really don't. I believe that the impact of the decisions we made in Somalia will last for decades. We made some tragic mistakes, and we're going to pay for them for a long time. And I'll talk more about the resources specifically when I talk about the case study. Tactics. The how. Again, same thing in business. I can't change my employee base. I can't change my customers. I can't change their funding. But what I can change is how we do it. If we come up with a smarter way to do it, a more efficient way to do it, we're going to beat out our competitors. Same thing in aviation. We call it tactics in the military, but it is I think, the most powerful tool we have. That's why we do after-action reviews. That's why we do debriefs. That's why we're always analyzing, how did things go, what decisions were made, what tactics, techniques, and procedures were used that were effective or were not, and how do we change those. And I think as organizations go, the military does far better in this area than most organizations I've seen outside the military, although people seem to be catching on. Most organizations that I've interacted with outside of the military will do the drill. I mean, they'll go through the debrief, or they'll do critiques, but nobody follows up. And that's the key. 6 months later, when that iteration is going to occur again, somebody take responsibility for those lessons learned and make sure they're applied, and then measure the effectiveness of the changes along the way. That's where most organizations fall short, and that's where the gold lies. I mean, if you don't do that, all the after-action reviews, debriefs, and everything else is a complete waste of time. So someone in the chain of command has got to take ownership of that and make sure that those lessons learned are applied, the success is measured, things are tweaked again. It's a constant cycle, as we all know. Training, I don't have to tell this audience how important training is. It's a lifelong process. I always felt that despite how arrogant I might have acted as a flight lead in the 160th, I always knew in my heart that every day that I walked out to that airplane, there was something for me to learn. There was something I was going to experience that I hadn't experienced before, and I looked at it with that perspective. I think that's very important. If people get to a point where they don't think there's anything left for them to learn in their profession, then it's probably time for them to retire, especially when you talk about something like aviation. And then planning, absolutely critical. I've never seen anyone plan like we planned back then in special operations. In fact, we probably planned too much. There were missions that were on the shelf for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years that we just kept looking at, and maybe nothing wrong with that, but a lot of effort went into very, very specific and deliberate planning. I think we've evolved into a more mature model where you've basically got the tactics, techniques, and procedures well established, and then you adapt that to the specific scenario versus going through 4 days of deliberate planning like we might have done 10 or 15 years ago. But regardless, it's critical. And I think the critical thing to expand on that a bit is that everyone has to understand the plan. Because if you've been in combat, first time you make contact with the enemy, what happens? The plan falls apart. I mean, nothing goes the way you think it's going to go. They're either trained better or trained worse than you thought. They're more motivated or less motivated. There's more of them or less of them. You're as effective as you thought you were going to be, or you're more effective. It just never goes the way you thought it was going to go. So if everyone understands the plan, everyone understands the big pieces, everybody in the organization can make the right decisions as things evolve and keep the train moving in the right direction. I mentioned we're going to do questions at the end. Don't always ask that. In a smaller audience, I let people interrupt because it breaks it up a little bit. I was doing a presentation to a group of financial advisors, I think, or bankers or something 6 months ago, and we got to this slide, and I'm ranting and raving about all this stuff that most of them probably had no clue what I was talking about. And somebody raised their hand and said, "Sir, do you mind, why are those helicopters being towed?" And so that helped me understand my audience. Sorry. I dumbed it down quite a bit after that. Hopefully no one here thought that. They're being refueled. And when you talk about strategic planning and a strategic vision and thinking ahead, the first person that said, "I want to refuel a helicopter in flight with an airplane," was probably looked at a little sideways. I remember the first time I saw a picture of it, I thought, whoa, that's a little sporty. And it is, but it's one of those things, just like so many other things we do in the military, that once you go out there and establish the procedures and you learn how to do it and everything, it doesn't, aerial refuel does not, I don't think, ever become routine, but it's one of those things you're comfortable with, you go in, do day in and day out. But the first person to sell this concept was a visionary, and certainly, much like Cliff Walcott, could sell coolers to Eskimos, I think. This is a tough sell. But when you fast forward, and I'm sure there's been many other situations, but the one I know best is OEF, Afghanistan, start of the war, 2 weeks after 9/11, when these helicopters, the 160th, are being counted on to take special forces and other government agency representatives deep into the mountains of Afghanistan on 2,000-mile flight routes. What are you going to do if you don't have aerial refuel capability? You're not going. You cannot put enough refuel points into Afghanistan to go where these helicopters went. So that strategic thinking, that visionary, whoever that was, or that group was that created this capability, are largely responsible for the tremendous success that we realized in the early stages of that conflict. And without those people and the many other great ideas from people like them, we wouldn't have the incredible military capability that we have today. So, we need those great ideas. We need that strategic vision and that planning. So with all that understood, because, I didn't come up with this stuff. All that stuff was in place when I got to the 160th. So with all that great stuff, how is it that we go to Mogadishu and come up with what I think most people would put in the loss column? And I won't argue that at the strategic level. And in fact, I absolutely advocate and support that position. But from a tactical perspective, I do not consider Somalia or the October 3rd battle to be a loss. But it, generally speaking, is considered a failure for U.S. policy and the U.S. military. So how do you end up in that situation? And that's what we're going to talk about next for about 20 or 30 minutes or so. So a little background. I know there's a lot of folks here who've probably studied this in great detail, and I'm just going to hit the high points. Mogadishu is the capital city. Somalia is the Horn of Africa. Mogadishu is about 800,000, but it's a nomadic society, so it shifts up and down, but most numbers I've read put it somewhere around 800,000. For those who live where I do, that's Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, that's about the size of Nashville. So that's a pretty big city, all right, when you think about the challenge here. They had been involved in a political struggle that had gone on for around a decade, I think. There was a government had been overthrown. Siad Barre was the former leader. And the guy who emerges as the most popular clan leader, who becomes public enemy number one for the United States, is actually a folk hero to most in Mogadishu, Muhammad Farah Aidid. But he hadn't kind of put everybody else out of the way, and the conflict had continued on for, as I said, almost a decade. So they've destroyed pretty much everything along the way. There's no infrastructure, there's no police force, there's no military, there's no running water, there's no electricity. I mean, there's pretty much nothing left. The whole place is devastated. To make things worse, they were hit with a multi-year drought. It had gone roughly 3 years without rain, and in a society like this where people live by what they can grow or harvest or trade for, something like a drought has a devastating effect. And the numbers that I've read, 300,000 people died of starvation. I mean, that is a monster disaster. I mean, there aren't very many in modern history where that many people die as a result of a natural incident like this. So combining that widespread famine with the political chaos turned this into a pretty nasty place. Well, just like in all these other incidents where there's human suffering, the United States and all of our allies and the countries in this world that have resources to spare, which we do, did what they could. They donated food, shelter, medicine, talent, logistics, all the things that you need to kind of turn the tide of starvation. Unfortunately, because it's so hazardous in Mogadishu, none of these relief organizations can really accomplish much. They're forced to hold out in their compounds. They can't get out and distribute the food. When they try to get out to distribute the food, it gets stolen by one of the clans, whichever one happens to be in that particular part of the city or the country. So none of the goodwill of the world is doing any good. We decide that we're going to intervene militarily in December of 1992. For me, it's the first time I'd ever heard of Somalia. I remember watching the news and seeing U.S. military forces coming through the surf. It was an amphibious assault. And on the beach is the media. Anybody remember that? Lights, camera, that's our military entry into Somalia. Now, I've not talked to a person yet who says there was a shot fired on that invasion. Not a shot fired. Not a building destroyed. Not a life taken. Slam dunk success. I mean, how many missions have we gone on where no shots fired, the terrain is taken, nothing destroyed, no losses on either side? I mean, how many? Not very many. I have a theory about why that was, and I've asked every audience in the last year if anybody could throw the word out there that I'm looking for. Does anyone have a word they would use to describe why that occurred? Why were we able to do that? One word. Anybody? Fear? Did somebody say fear? That is actually the byproduct of the word I'm looking for. Respect, that's close. Credibility is the word I use. Credibility. It's the whole walk softly but carry a big stick and make people think you're going to smash them on the head if they don't do what you want them to do. Credibility. When you have credibility, life's easy. You don't have to kill people. You don't have to destroy things because people fear you. And that's what we need as a nation. So that when we say we're going to go do something, things happen. When we lose credibility, I got 4 teenagers, all right? I live this every day. I mean, if I don't have credibility, I'm talking to the wall, all right? And you have credibility by following up on your commitments, you know, not giving up when the going gets tough, staying the course, all the stuff that I think we understand, but I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody talk about what the result is when you don't. And the result is you lose credibility. And then that mission that took 12 hours to accomplish now suddenly turns into a slugfest where things are destroyed, people are killed, and then we're questioning what in the world are we doing here. Credibility is king, and it's why, you know, I from the beginning have felt so strongly about our continued commitment to success in Iraq and Afghanistan, because if we lose credibility in this one, it's gone. It's gone. And then everything that we try to do in the future will then become 10 times harder. Now, there's people 1,000 times smarter than I am about this kind of stuff in this audience. That's my perspective. But I'm a strong believer that it's dead on accurate, because if you look at the things that have happened since, and if you look at the resistance that we have faced in these locations, a lot of it stems, I believe, as a result of the fact that they think we will quit. Now, we've kind of proven them wrong after 9 years of going at it here, but they still, in some cases, believe eventually we will lose the will to win. That is what motivates them. That is what keeps them moving forward. That's what keeps them confident in their ability to eventually defeat us. And it is us who would defeat ourselves. It is not the enemy. There is no question, I'm sure all of you know, given any set of circumstances, that we could defeat any adversary anywhere, anytime. It is when we lose the will through, you know, the impact of the media, or, you know, our politicians decide they don't have the stomach for it, or elections are coming up, or whatever, that we restrict the ability of our military to go out there and get things done. So we had credibility, and we got this thing done easily. I would argue that this is one of the most successful military endeavors in modern history for that reason. Complete success, no losses taken, no casualties on either side. And if you contrast that with 10 months later, bodies being dragged through the streets by the enemy, celebrating the loss of Americans, I mean, that just show you how the mistakes that I'm going to talk about that are going to occur over the next few months in this situation had such a tremendous impact over the way this whole thing went. So the mission's a slam dunk success. We have an election back here in the States and transition of power from one administration to the other. So we're right at the beginning of a brand new presidential administration. None of them are perfect when they first come into office. This one, I think most would argue, was certainly lacking in their understanding and appreciation of the military, certainly lacking in their understanding and appreciation of the complexities of you know, international politics and all of the things that this particular situation involves. And they changed the mission. You know, the mission initially was go in, stabilize the region, provide security relief organizations, get the food out to those who need it, and you're done. That was all accomplished. But in the first 6 months of this new administration, they decided we're going to do more than that. We're going to help the Somalis stand up a government. We're going to help bring infrastructure back. We're going to go beyond our initial objectives. And as all of us know that have studied military operations, you're starting to go down a slippery slope here. I mean, without stepping back and allowing the commanders to look at this new scope and determine what they need to get it done, you are going down a slippery slope. And again, because of their inexperience, they didn't realize that as they started to pursue this course of action. From a military perspective, the first thing that needs to be done is to disarm the population. I mean, let's face it, if we could do that in some of our U.S. cities, that would be a pretty good step toward law and order. But you ever ask yourself, why don't we do it here? Because it's hard. It can result in rioting and widespread rebellion and making the situation worse than it already is. But for some reason, we sort of hand wave all that stuff and go ahead and hand those kind of missions down to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and that's what happens here. So small groups of soldiers from a variety of nations are out doing these weapons search and seizure operations. Remember, this is a city the size of Nashville, all right? This is about twice the size of Fallujah. And you remember what it took to bring that thing under control. You're about twice the size. In a lot of other areas, very similar place. On the 5th of June, there are 24 Pakistanis who are out there doing this weapon search and seizure operation, and should come as no surprise, eventually they run across a group of individuals who do not want to cooperate. I mean, that's going to be the case in pretty much every situation. You're going to have those who do, those who are uncertain, and those who are adamantly opposed to what it is you're trying to do. They ran into the adamantly opposed group, and they are ambushed and slaughtered, all 24 of them. As you well know, our adversaries do not play by the rules. They don't care about the Geneva Convention. They're going to do what they need to do to win. And one of the things that they feel they need to do to win is strike fear in our hearts, make us not want to go to the fight because they are so brutal and ruthless. That's what terrorism's all about. That's why they behead people on television. They want us to fear them so much that we cave into their demands. In this particular case, they play soccer with the heads of some of these people in the street publicly to make a statement that they're not here to take prisoners, they're here to win, and they're going to win at any cost. So the next day, the UN says they're going to bring whoever's responsible for this to justice. Everybody pretty much suspects Mohammed Farah Aidid because he's got the most to lose. As you know, in any change scenario, the person that's likely to resist the most is the person that has the most to lose. So he does. He's got about 2/3 of the support of the people in the city, so they feel that he's probably responsible. There's evidence to indicate that, in fact, he was. And in response to all of this activity, our Special Operations Command identifies this as a possible deployment location, and we assemble forces at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and what we call Operation Gothic Serpent is born. Now, just like those other missions that we planned for 7 years, we do it just like every other military organization does it. We need to know what we're up against, situation, all of that stuff. So we go through all that, and we come up with a solution set that is still out there today. I mean, it's been modified slightly, but the fundamental pieces and parts of what was developed there at Fort Bragg back in June of '93 is still out there being used today. And essentially, it establishes mission templates that you can apply to different scenarios so that you don't have to go through that long 4-day planning cycle. You can react quickly because we know we're after a person. So we want to be able to get off the ground in 15 minutes if we can with a force of 20+ helicopters. So we're going to try to get every detail of these plans down to the lowest level possible. And we do that. And in the conduct of that, a request comes in from the United Nations. Not an expert, but I don't know any other time that this has happened. The UN says, we want a military force to go to Somalia to capture Mohammed Farah Aidid, officially. So the president becomes the decision maker. And he is briefed by somebody, I don't know by name who it was, on this operation. And from what I've read, he was told the chance of success of this mission at this point in time is 1 in 4, 25%. That's about as far off the mark as you could be. Because the key element is knowing where the target is. In a manhunt, if you know where the target is, you've got about 95% of what you need to know. When the target goes underground, the chance of success plummets. At this point in time, we know where the guy is. He's making public appearances. He's making speeches on the street in Mogadishu with a couple of security guards, U.S. military forces blocks away. He is low-hanging fruit. We could have got this guy. I would assess the probability of success in June of '93 of a soft force going to Somalia and capturing this guy, 95%. So what happens is we miss the window of opportunity. And if you're a decision maker, leader, you know what I'm talking about. All decisions have a window of opportunity. If you are too conservative and wait too long, that window is going to close and your advantage is gone. That's why great leaders seem to know when to make the call, whether it's their experience or their knowledge or their they were born with it or intuition or whatever it is. Great leaders know when to make the call because they make it in that window of opportunity. And when it closes, you're on a level playing field with everybody else. You no longer have that advantage. Here, we had the advantage. We let it close, not because of a bad decision, but because of bad information. Based on that briefing, we are told, disband, go back to home station, we're not going to deploy. Well, like in many other situations in this world, turning a blind eye to it does not fix the problem. It is probably going to fester, it's probably going to get worse, and that's in fact what happens over the summer of '93 in Somalia. There are attacks back and forth. I could spend hours talking about some of them because there's certainly key lessons to be learned in many of these, but in the essence of time, I'm just going to skip over them and tell you that a lot of things changed over the summer. The key turning point was on August 8th when the Somalis attacked a U.S. military Humvee with a command detonated mine. Now, this is the first time we can say this was an ambush, basically, of U.S. military forces. All 4 soldiers on board that Humvee are killed. And now, just like the tipping point in Panama, when Manuel Noriega killed an American service person, we finally deployed. After 6 years of planning it, we finally went because they killed an American service person. Same situation here. 4 Americans killed, deliberate attack. We spin back up, go back to Fort Bragg, and now, because the mission has changed, our leadership does what they should do. They step back, they look at the mission again, and they determine that the initial plan is inadequate. This thing is different than it was just a month ago. So we want to bring in more resources. We want some flexibility, some capability, some backup, to give us some options once we hit the ground. So we form what is now called Task Force Ranger. Got a whole company of Rangers. We still have Delta Force who is going to do the primary assault, and then a number of helicopters from the 160th who's been on board from the beginning, but we're going to take many more aircraft than we were initially planned to do. And now, because this thing is more complicated, we go back through these planning and rehearsal cycles so that we can make sure that this thing we'll be able to execute this thing. What you have to recognize about a helicopter operation like this, where we're talking about 20-plus helicopters going into a single city block, the threat really is not the enemy, although they're a threat. The threat is airspace control. I mean, keeping people from crashing into each other. We're not talking about tens of thousands of feet of vertical separation. The highest aircraft was at 1,500 feet. Most of the aircraft were below 300 feet. So you've got 300 feet of vertical space to get 20 helicopters from a variety of directions in and out, blacked out conditions, dusty landing area. The absolute biggest threat is mid-air collisions. So we went through the plan in great detail, made some refinements to adjust it to this many aircraft, and got it to where I felt it needed to be. We were rock solid and ready to roll. Now that's a positive impact of the 3-month delay. The negative impact is this, and this is the short list. The most wanted guy in the country, you basically tell him you're coming to get him, and then you give him 3 months to develop and refine his tactics. I mean, we absolutely lost the opportunity to get this guy by waiting. We absolutely lost it. That 95% chance of probability drops to, again, I'm using rough numbers here, but I'd say less than 5. Because we don't know where he is. You remember the guy in North Carolina that was hiding out there on his own for months, okay? This is the United States. We got all the infrastructure, law enforcement, everything that we can bring to bear to find the guy, and we can't find a single person who's on his own in a defined geographic area. Now flip the advantage 180 degrees the other direction. He's got the support, he's got the infrastructure. We don't, and now we're going to try to find a guy in a city the size of Nashville. It is literally like finding a needle in a haystack. The ability to find one guy under these conditions is very, very, very low. So we almost have no chance of making this happen. Tensions build, like everything else we've been involved in the last 20 years. People want results. People don't want to see our troops deployed on long periods of time. People don't want to see losses. People don't want to see our good name trashed around the world by people who don't understand what we're really trying to do. All this stuff creates that tension. But the unforgivable sin, the thing that I think we have learned, because I've been asked that question over and over for 17 years, is we make a mistake here that we haven't made since, and we ought never to make again. We had troops in the field in harm's way with a mission that's getting more complicated, and we took the resources out against the will of the on-site commander. That is unforgivable. At the peak of U.S. involvement, we had 28,000 U.S. troops. Carrier, fixed-wing aircraft, AC-130s, tanks, infantry, Marines, special forces, everything you need to prosecute this mission. By the time we deploy, I mean, I remember I personally asked the question at Fort Bragg, because we're talking about flight routes in and out. I raised my hand and said, where are the Marines? Just wanting to know where they were. Oh, they're all gone. They left. I mean, they didn't leave on their own. They were ordered to leave. 1,500 American troops in country when we get there. 1,500. To do the same mission we had initially, plus disarm the population, plus capture the top 50 leaders in the Ha-Brigader clan. Who's paying attention here? The most profound quote I read about Somalia after the fact came from the media was that the administration was asleep at the switch. They were not paying attention to what was going on. Nobody was putting the brain power into looking at this thing like they should have and making decisions at that upper level to resource and set the commander up for success. Absolutely unforgivable. Not only are the forces taken out, but the AC-130s are taken out. If you don't know what that is, I'll show you a picture one here in just a second. Low-intensity conflict, don't leave home without it. I mean, Mogadishu is a perfect scenario for an AC-130. Absolutely perfect. All of the armor is taken out. You ask a soldier, Marine, anybody on the ground today that's got to go into a city in Iraq or Afghanistan, what do you want to either be in or have nearby? I know the answer. It's going to be an MRAP, it's going to be a tank, armored personnel carrier, something to protect them from IEDs, small arms fire, that kind of stuff. All taken out. We're driving around in 5 tons. I mean, the guys went through the trash pile to find ballistic material to put on the floors of the 5 tons to give them some protection when they had to go in on the ground on these assaults. And then the other thing that I'm sure all of us who understand warfare understand is the advantage tends to tilt against us the longer something goes on, because initially we have all those things that we understand well, element of surprise, overwhelming firepower, all those things that make us successful. But when you're on the ground in a sustained operation for a long period, your weak spots start to emerge, and the enemy starts to know us, I would argue, at a greater rate than we know them, because our ability to gather intelligence against an adversary like we have in Afghanistan is a pretty significant challenge, where theirs, not so much. I mean, they know where we are, they know what we're doing, they don't have our technology, but they sure have a lot of information about us. So all of these things are the negative impact of the delays. We finally do deploy, and we fly a number of missions, all of which would be on this map. Not really any point in showing you where they would all be, but I will point out a couple of key features. One is we were living right there on the airfield. That road right there is pretty much free to anyone who wants to travel on it. So I am from here to the back of the room for the enemy, which gives them unlimited information gathering capability. They're dropping mortars on us. There's small arms fire coming into the compound, all of that. We don't want to be there. We want to be on a ship, because this is the Indian Ocean. So if we're on a ship in the Indian Ocean, they can no longer see us, and they can no longer impart any harm upon us. The easy thing to see here is the threat. And in fact, the easy thing to quantify is the threat, because the 18th member of Task Force Ranger to loses his life standing on the ramp on October 4th, and he's killed by a mortar. We're on a ship, that guy's not dead. And you could pretty much go through just about every loss, minus a handful, and attribute them to specific decisions made about this mission at the higher level. That's the easiest one to quantify. Now, you might say, well, a ship, you guys ship qualified, were there regulation issues? No, we're all ship qualified. There's really no other major conflicts going on in the world other than this right now. So in terms of, commitments elsewhere, there aren't any. The other one that's not quite so easy to see, though, except for many of you who understand this stuff in the audience, that is even more significant, is by being on a ship, we gain back a little of that element of surprise. Because if I'm on the airfield and I crank 25 helicopters and load 100 and something guys in ninja costumes, I mean, the people watching me are going to have 10 or 15 minutes notice that we're coming. But if I'm on a ship And the first thing they see is 24 helicopters going 100 miles an hour, and we hit the target in about 2 minutes. That compresses that reaction time down to almost nothing. So not only did we give up force protection, but we gave up what most would put at the top of the list, the things you want to be successful in a combat engagement, the element of surprise. We gave them both up. And the resources are floating around the world, and we're all qualified to be on them. Absolutely unforgivable sin. The other thing that I want to point out about the map is here's the target, right in the worst part of town, Bakara Market, Black Sea area. And then when you talk about where the aircraft go down, that's Super 6-1, first aircraft that goes down. And there's my aircraft, Super 6-4. One thing that gets overlooked is we lost 5 Black Hawks. One will actually be shot down in the friendly area here, Super 6-2, flown by Jim Yacone, who's coming up, I think, here in the next few weeks to do a presentation. And then 2 others will make it back to the airfield, but disabled, unable to fly as a result of heavy gunfire or RPG fire. So obviously a very aggressive threat. But leading up to it, quite a bit of success. 6 missions prior to October 3rd, 3-day, 3-night. Light resistance, because even though we're showing them we're taking off, they're still not sure exactly what we're going to do. So we did still have a little bit of that element of surprise, but as mission by mission by mission goes by, it starts to erode, and they start to understand exactly what we're doing and when we're doing it. Limited casualties. We lost no aircraft and no people in those 6 missions. In a couple cases, what I would call bad intelligence. That's not a slam on the intel community. It's a difficult task. I mean, to try to figure out exactly what is going on the other side of the fence has never been and never will be an easy task. You're relying on unreliable sources. You're relying on information that may or may not be current. And the result of which, at the point of the spear is we hit some dry holes or some bad targets. I mean, that's in the end what happened. Didn't cause us any harm, but still, you don't want to put yourself out there exposing your force and basically playing your hand if you don't have to. So it's something that we should, with all our effort, try to avoid. On the 5th mission, the enemy did what I think we've done a tremendous job of doing in these current conflicts, and that is adapt. You can't go into a fight and expect you're going to fight the same way on day 365 that you're going to fight tomorrow. I mean, you've got to every day go out there and look at this is a new picture, new situation. I need to be evolving. I need to be ahead of the enemy, and our enemy is doing the same thing, because in places like Somalia, in places like Afghanistan, they've been fighting since they came out of the womb. I mean, they understand this stuff. They were born in it. So they don't need to go to Carlisle Barracks to understand it. It's part of their DNA. They understand it. They know how to fight. So they're doing exactly what some of us have to go to school to learn or learn through our combat experiences. They evolve. And they realize that when we first show up and they see these Black Hawks and Little Birds flying around the city, that those aircraft are probably not the kind of targets you want to try to engage with a rocket-propelled grenade, because we're probably flying 100, 120 knots or miles per hour. So they refrain from using that weapon. But once they see how these missions are actually being executed, they come to a very obvious conclusion. At some point, we're not going 120 miles an hour. We're stationary. And in an urban fight, if this is the urban environment, not only am I stationary, but I'm stationary surrounded by the bad guys. I mean, I am right there in the fight with no armor to speak of, very vulnerable platform that now is about the easiest thing on the planet to shoot down. And they realized this after we flew a few missions, and on the 5th mission, they started to shoot these rocket-propelled grenades at us. We knew they were there. We knew they were a threat. But they had not emerged on the battlefield yet. Therefore, other than planning a downed aircraft contingency, we really paid them, not a whole lot of attention. But when they started to shoot them, and a few days later, when an aircraft from the 101st Airborne Division was shot down on the 25th of September, we realized there is nothing we can do to prevent an RPG shootdown. And I say that because it's a dumb weapon. There's no technology, even today, 17 years ago, to defeat this thing, which makes it very effective. It's like being in a snowball fight if you don't understand this kind of stuff. What can you do in a snowball fight? You can run, you can hide, and that's about it. Cover and concealment. That's your only options. You cannot defeat this thing with technology. So what do? We try to move fast, minimize our time on the target, fly at night, all those things. But at some point, you're in that profile. I mean, you are vulnerable. So we know that sooner or later, in all likelihood, somebody's going to get shot down. And ironically, about a week before October 3rd, we go through a downed aircraft drill. We're out on a training flight, and the way we do it in aviation is somebody in the back is a role player, and they hand a note to the crew. It says, "You've just been shot down, land the aircraft and shut it down." And then the rest of the force has to go through all the actions necessary, and nobody expects this to happen, but they have to go through all the actions necessary to support this downed aircraft. That downed aircraft in that rehearsal was Cliff Walcott, Super 6-1. What we didn't factor is we did it out in a remote area. We did it out in open terrain. Easy to handle. Security's easy, reconnaissance is easy. Do it in the middle of the urban area, totally different animal, which is where it actually ends up happening when it does. So we were a little bit naive about our ability to handle this downed aircraft scenario, but one person wasn't. And I would encourage you in how you establish your leadership style, for those of you who are going to be leaders in these wonderful organizations, to advocate this kind of an environment. And that is one that is open to ideas from everybody within it. Because if you go in with, I'm the 06 or whatever you are, and I've been doing this for 25 years and been in combat 18 times, and I don't need to hear what you think, from your level, then you're going to miss an opportunity to get some great stuff out there in the open. But if you build an environment that encourages people to share those ideas, you're going to find stuff that's going to make you a lot more successful, and it's going to come from places you would never anticipate. In this case, the example I'm going to use is somebody in Task Force Ranger is intelligent and perceptive enough to recognize before October 3rd that everything we've been doing since the unit was born and everything we've been doing in Army aviation since Vietnam is flawed in this scenario. Because what have we always done for the past, whoever knows how many decades, with regard to downed aircraft? We have a search and rescue helicopter that goes in and recovers the crew. I mean, that's pretty much standard operating procedures. And in almost all situations, it's the right answer. And in a lot of other situations. But in this one, it is absolutely not the right answer. And somebody within Task Force Ranger realized that before the bad thing happened. They raised their hand and said, I realize we've had search and rescue birds in the package going back decades, but think about this, okay? We're over the target, we're hovering, fast roping the customers in, and we take an RPG. Where am I going to crash in all likelihood? Probably right here, right? I mean, the Army gets the raw deal all the time. We're close to the ground, we're right in the fight, we can't glide away, parachute out, nothing. So we are right there. So if I send a search and rescue bird in to recover this crew and do what search and rescue birds typically do, which is drop people right at the crash site, anybody want to speculate what's probably going to happen to that search and rescue bird? Get shot down, right? Well, it's easy when I put it in this context, or it's easy to say it the day after it happens. But if you're in the middle of it, and you're thinking about all the other things that you got to think about, it doesn't come to light quite that easily. But somebody reached that conclusion, and somebody raised their hand and said, helicopter's the wrong answer. We need something else. And hopefully everybody in this room knows what the right answer is. The right answer is a tank. Now in Vietnam, the right answer is probably not a tank. In Hurricane Katrina, the right answer is probably not a tank. Desert Storm, probably not a tank. But in this scenario, remember the map. We're 2 miles from most of the targets. So an M1 tank is going to get there about as fast as the helicopter is going to get there. And people said, the roads are too narrow. They'll make their own road, all right? They will. There's no question. Most of you have been to these places around the world. We're not talking about 3,000 PSI concrete, all right? We're talking about stuff that crumbles when you bump into it. So the tank is going to make its own road. In fact, most of the roads are wide enough anyway. So we formally requested a tank to do search and rescue. And that request went all the way up to the Secretary of Defense, who I met at the memorial ceremony at Fort Bragg, who finally got it, that the consequences of his decision resulted in the death of great Americans. I mean, I don't think until he actually stood there and looked at the families and looked at the boots and looked at the weapons and the goggles and the helmets that he really got it. But when he was at that memorial ceremony, I'll never forget it. You could see it in his eyes that he recognized his failure. And it was a failure because they said no. Not because We didn't have tanks. We have tanks all over the world. And we got tank drivers and crews that would like nothing more than to go destroy buildings in Mogadishu to get to a downed aircrew. But that request was denied. I talked about why the carrier was significant. That was denied. AC-130 was in country for the first stages of Somalia, moved to Nairobi, Kenya, when we really needed it. That's an AC-130, if you don't know what it is. Howitzer hanging out the side, 20 millimeter, 40 millimeter, precision fires on target. If I'm standing up and publicly saying a good thing about the Air Force, this thing must be awesome. All right. I saw this quote in a briefing, I don't know, 10 years ago. This is Somalia in a sentence. I mean, this is where we went wrong. This is the mistake we made. You could argue this applies to Vietnam. At least from my armchair, watching Iraq and Afghanistan, this does not apply. Now, does that mean every soldier out there has got everything that they need every day? Probably not. But that's probably more of a logistical issue than it is a decision or policy issue. This is about policy and decision-making at the high level. Absolutely unforgivable. This is why 18 Americans died. Everyone, probably not, but it is why we had the losses that we lost. Anybody know who said that? It was in a PowerPoint presentation, 20 slides, former chairman Powell, Colin Powell. And when somebody sent his briefing to me and I saw this, I said, and if you remember, he was the chairman when we went into Somalia, retired, and then saw this whole part I'm talking about now unravel from his living room, and he's probably thinking, what are they doing? And it's unfortunate we didn't have people with great experience and influence that could have caused this to all be avoided. Anyhow, all these conditions are set, and just like every other combat op I've been on, the guys out in the field and the gals out in the field, they just want to get it done. You know, give us what we need to do, give us the mission, we want to get it done, and we want to go home. I mean, that's pretty much universal. You know, that's the thing that drives us is the mission, the commitment to each other, and then at some point that we get to go home. That's a big part of it. So we're motivated to get it done. Now, Clay mentioned in the bio that I was a flight leader, and I was on this operation. So I'm in the Joint Operations Center with General Garrison, with the flight leads from the other elements, Ground Force Commander, and when this thing comes down. And we look at it, and there's a few gotchas here. Daytime, don't like that. But again, you don't pick the time and place. I mean, when you're after a person, you go or you don't. You can't determine the time of attack. Worst part of town, talked about that already, no landing zones. The streets may be big enough for a tank, but they're not big enough for a Black Hawk, unfortunately. So we can fast roll people in, but the extraction part is a difficult challenge. Rooftop extraction is not a great idea in urban fights because, I don't want to get too long-winded here, but we're okay on time, I think. In an air-land scenario, for those of you who are non-aviation, when I land, only you can shoot me, right, while I'm on the ground. But if I'm fast roping or extracting off a rooftop for an extended period of time, now I open it up to everybody within range of their weapon. So a rooftop extraction is not a great idea. The other thing about a rooftop extraction, at least with Blackhawks, is you usually have to load from one side. So it's now taking you twice as long to get everybody on the bird. So you're really, really increasing your exposure. We always had it in there as a possibility, but we didn't really like to do it, certainly not at this point in the conflict. So we got to take these guys out by ground. If you ever wondered why the ground vehicles, that's the whole logic behind why the ground vehicles. We confirm the presence of 2 top 10 personnel, and we launch. And these people were actually there. The intelligence was good. It was dead on, accurate, timely, and we launched the force. And everything is going according to plan until about 40 minutes into the mission. And the ground force in the consolidation phase, where they're counting heads and getting ready to do the extraction on the ground vehicles. We've got 2 Black Hawks in a tight orbit overhead. They're providing fire support using customers on board and the miniguns that are organic to the aircraft itself. When Super 6-1, doing that fire support mission, is shot down. The bottom photograph is what remains of Super 6-1. That's the belly. That's the nose of it right there. It's on its side. Miraculously, everybody in the back of that aircraft survives. The 2 pilots are killed on impact. 2 very good friends of ours, Cliff Walcott and Donovan Briley. Absolutely unsurvivable. They were killed on impact. But everybody in the back is alive. So now the commander's got that scenario that he really has no solution for. He's got to throw the wrong answer at a very difficult problem. Somebody gets on the radio and says, Carl Meyer and Keith Jones, I'm certain came up with the idea, let us go in our little bird, and we can get a couple of people out. So they fly in, even though we hadn't planned that, it wasn't a contingency. They land to the rear, basically at just beyond that road intersection you can see right there in the back of the photograph. And one of the pilots gets out, goes and extracts 2 of the injured, puts them in the back of that little bird. Little bird has no crew in the back, just the pilots. Gets back in the cockpit, and they get out of there. The search and rescue bird comes in, and just like the scenario we described a moment ago, they still have people hanging on the ropes underneath the aircraft when it gets hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. But good training, good communication, good discipline, all the stuff that makes success out of failure, they stabilize the aircraft, they get the guys on the ground, fly it out of there, make it to the airfield. That crew is in a spare helicopter and back out flying again in about 15 minutes, and they would fly for about 15 more hours. The colonel then calls me and says, I want you to replace Super 6-1 over the target. So I'm going to replace this aircraft, and I'm going to do what they were doing, except I got no customers in the back. So we're going to use just our minigun and employ it the best we can. The problem is that the minigun shoots at a minimum 2,000 rounds a minute, okay, of 7.62. So I can't go into this complex urban fight with people all over the place, dispersed, not where we infilled them, and just kind of hose down the countryside. I mean, I can't do that. The risk of fratricide is too great. So we got to understand the situation first. So we go in and we're orbiting the target. Now, I had been into the target once already, and that top photograph is my guys that were in the back of my aircraft. In fact, that's their helmets right there. Somebody had a disposable camera, and when they hit the ground, took that camera out and took a photograph. So if you're wondering what was the landing zone like, all of that stuff, that is my LZ on October 3rd. So I've put 18 Rangers on the ground. I'm holding north of the city, and now I come back in to replace Super 6-1 over the target. We make it around about 4 times when this happens.
Like he got clipped pretty good.
Screw pedals are okay. No, we're good. Got a slight vibration in the pedals, but we're good.
All right, put it down on the airfield, Super 6-4. Have it checked out just to be safe.
Roger. Hey, Ray, I'm getting a lot of movement in these pedals. Check the systems again.
Get Strookers, call them back out there. They need to get to Durant's crash site fast.
We got another bird down.
I want them out of there. All of them.
So if you've seen the movie, you probably recognize that as a clip from Black Hawk Down. The tail rotor did come off the aircraft, but it wasn't that glamorous, I suppose, where, you know, we went round and round and we're making radio calls and small talk. I mean, it was, the tail rotor came off and it was, Dorothy's house, e-ticket ride to the ground. The tail rotor on a Black Hawk keeps it from spinning, and at low airspeed, low altitude, you have no options other than shut the engines off. So we shut the engines off, which makes you fall faster, for those of you who aren't aviators, which is not good either, for those of you who really aren't aviators. And we hit the ground, I have no idea, but so hard, because they don't do post-crash investigation on combat losses, most anyway. We hit the ground so hard that even though the landing gear have shock absorbers, the seat has a shock absorber, we still have enough vertical velocity that it snaps my right femur off on the edge of the seat. So think about the seat you're in right now. How high would I have to drop you in that seat for the gravity to break your femur in half? I mean, I was 32 years old, training for a marathon, so it wasn't like I had osteoporosis. I mean, I was pretty healthy, strongest bone in your body. Not only that, but crushed vertebrae in my spine, the bones, not the discs that we're all probably dealing with, but the bones smashed into each other. One of them compressed 33%. So not only did I have less gray hair, not only did I have fewer wrinkles, fewer kids, but I was a lot taller back in '93. But we're alive, and we're alive because of all the amazing things that we do in the acquisition world, and that keeps the materiel piece of this military moving. I mean, the lessons learned from Vietnam, all the stuff that goes into design is why I'm here today. You know, no post-crash fire. You know, without all that crash attenuation, I'd have been killed for sure. So great stuff, even though pretty significant injuries. So I'm in that seat right there, that black hole, which is the right seat. And when I regain consciousness, it's like somebody shut the aircraft down because the fuel lines all broke away, but they self-seal. You don't spill fuel all over the place. So all this great stuff is working as advertised. And I start to, see what's going on, and as I regain consciousness, I wish I hadn't, because this is a pretty ugly situation. And we realize that we're in a tough spot. We're all alive. Ray Frank and I communicate briefly. He makes his way out of the aircraft. About that time, familiar name, and his comrade, Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon, arrive alongside the aircraft. I knew them. They were part of Task Force Ranger. And when I saw them, I thought, well, the rescue force is already here somehow. Don't know how they got here. Don't care. Just, assume you're going to get me on a vehicle and get me out of here, because my part in this is over. What I don't realize is that's it. There's only 2 of them. And it's going to take 7 more hours before anybody's going to get to our crash site. So they had been flying in Super 6-2. They requested permission to be dropped off. The general, as I know the story, denied that request until the 3rd time, where they said, if you don't let us go in, these guys are going to be lost. So he gave them permission to go in. They were dropped off. They made their way to our aircraft, got me out, got the rest of the crew out, and we held out as long as we could, which is probably about 15 minutes, when the enemy, being of greater numbers, overran our site from this side over here. So when they overran us, I'm pretty much right here, oblivious to it all, other than I can hear what's going on. I fired all the rounds out of my MP5. Randy was the last man standing other than myself. He gave me Gary's weapon. I shot all the rounds out of that. And then he made his last stand. It was like being at the range. The volume of fire was tremendous, and it was only a matter of minutes before he couldn't hold them all off. He went down and the shooting stopped. When they overran the site, I was pretty much convinced that my life was over, but there was not really anything I could do about it. I had my survival knife and had been asked whether or not I ever thought about committing suicide. I didn't. I also had my pistol, and it never entered my mind. To this day, I cannot explain to you why I never drew my pistol. It probably, in fact, saved me, because if I got this pistol drawn when I'm overrun by 150 Somalis, it's not going to do me a whole lot of good to try to shoot them with it. So I never drew it. They initially were going to kill me. We're almost certain. However, someone in the group realized that Adid wanted an American prisoner and managed to get control of the situation, stop the beating. Prior to that, they broke my cheekbone, my nose, my eye socket. They were ripping all my gear off, but got control of the situation, pushed them all away, and brought me into captivity. Now, the treatment, like it's been for pretty much everybody going back as long as I can remember, is horrible. They don't have any standards. They do what they want. They shot me in captivity. They carried me through the streets. They chained me up. They videotaped me. All the things that we don't do, or not supposed to do, and won't do. They just think nothing of it. When they asked me if I'd make a video, I initially said no, but I also realized that there's nothing I can do to stop them. When they show up with the camera, it's going to roll, and I have an opportunity to either just sit here or answer some questions or who knows what. I had been to survival school, and I thought about the training, and I was going to try to blink a message, but I couldn't remember the technique that they taught me how to do that. It had been 5 years. And I'm not a stupid person. I just couldn't remember. Arguably, I'm in shock. So, it's just, I just couldn't remember what to do. And I finally decided, just settle on the questions, answer them the way they taught you to in school, and here's what ends up airing on international television.
CW3, Mike Durant, U.S. Army. U.S. Army. I'm a Black Hawk pilot. Black Hawk pilot. I just think this operation is good. This aversion is... How do you take this aversion? I'm a soldier, I have to do what I'm told. Even if you kill the people you see. Innocent people being killed is not good.
Now, this went on for quite a long time, and those were pretty much the only questions that I answered. And it worked like a charm. The survival school gave me an A+. The enemy didn't know what they had. They thought they had me saying something significant when, in fact, they didn't. So, in the end, at least from a joint personnel recovery perspective, the video actually was to my advantage. It sure didn't feel like it at the time, but it was. Some of the other things that happened in captivity, I don't have time to get into. That's a Bible that I got from the Red Cross. I decided to keep a journal. It was, there's a psychological effect to that. And I also was confident they'd let me take that with me when I left. They're devout Muslims, but from what I experienced, they respected my Christianity and allowed me to read the Bible undisturbed, but that's because I did the same to them. I mean, when they were bowing to Mecca and praying, I was quiet and respectful. It goes back to what we learned as little kids. Treat other people the way you want to be treated, and most of the time you're going to get that back. And they teach you that in survival school, and it works. It certainly worked in this situation. I want to leave time for some questions, so let me wrap it up. The aftermath to all this kind of stuff is a significant challenge. And, I'm one person. We now have tens of thousands that have these kind of experiences that have much more physical impacts than I have, fortunately for me. So all I can do is share my insight into, what helped me make it through and become who I am today. By no means perfect, but pretty much at least as far as I think I could ever go back to who I was before. It really comes back to family, friends, and organization. If you're going to be involved in something like this, there's no better unit to be in than the 160th, because the 160th takes care of its own. And I know a lot of military organizations do, but in my life experience, nobody does it like the 160th. So everything that was done to help me, because, I went out there and put myself on the line, and the unit recognized that, and they would have done anything for me in return. And that's why people keep doing it. That's why guys are there for 20 years, because they know the unit is there for them. Why else would you go to combat every 3 months for 8 years in a row? Because you're passionate about the organization, because you trust it, just like you trust your comrades. And that is a deliberate effort on the part of all the leadership that's been through there over the years to build that culture and that thing that you can rely on if you happen to be in the unit. The recovery has got to be multifaceted. I always say it has to be in all 4 of these areas, and we don't always address all 4. Physical is the obvious one, and we're doing a pretty good job in that area. But you've got the psychological, which is a little bit squishy one that's kind of hard to get to sometimes, but you can't survive something like this and not be impacted. You can't. People who think that they have gone through something this demanding and come out the other side exactly who they were before, I believe are very naive. It has to change the way you look at life, unless you had a really horrible upbringing. I guess maybe I was blessed, because it certainly impacted me. Professional. What does everybody want? I haven't been to Walter Reed that much, but I've been a few times, and every soldier I visited said the same thing. They want to get back to their unit. Every single one. And I believe they mean it. I don't believe they're just saying it because they want us to think they're great heroes or warriors. They mean it. It's who they are at this point in their lives. So we got to professionally, and we've done that. Think about the fact that we have people with prosthetic devices flying aircraft and staying in the military. All that is exactly spot on what we need to be doing to get these great Americans back to who they were before, because they're valuable. It isn't just for them. You now have their experience that you can bring into the fight. It's not lost. So it's a two-way benefit. And then the spiritual piece, different for all of us, but I think critical. From whatever faith you happen to be a part of, it was huge for me, and I think absolutely a major impact on my healing and my psychological and spiritual state today. I want to tell you one quick story, and then we'll do questions, and I will have overrun by a minute or two, and I apologize. The Army, whatever that is, said that I would never fly again because my spine was deformed, and that's a grounding condition for military aviators. And part of that bullet number 3, the professional in me, didn't want to accept that. I wanted to get back in the cockpit. It is who I was. It's who I wanted to be from the time I was a young teenager and got in my first helicopter. And I wanted to fight that position. And I wasn't fighting it alone. I had the support of my entire chain of command. And what I decided to do on my behalf, to argue my point, is run the Marine Corps Marathon. They took a steel rod out of my femur in January of 1995. If you've never known anyone that's had a femur fracture, they pound this thing in like a grounding rod and stick 3 screws in it, and if your muscles are strong enough, you can stand. But in most cases, they got to take it out. And they took mine out in January, and I'm going to run 26 miles 10 months later. It was like a 6-hour procedure. Drills, chisels, hammers, all the above. Now, that's a little bit aggressive. But my first goal really was finish the race. I mean, get there and just finish the race somehow. That was goal number 1. Goal number 2 was beat Oprah, because Oprah ran this thing. She ran it in 1994, and she probably had a staff of trainers and everything else, but still, I'm not going back to the unit and saying that Oprah beat me. On that one, I would have cheated. All right, I'm an honest guy, but I would have cheated if I had the opportunity. I had a few more goals, one of which Del Daly was the regimental commander at the time. I wanted to beat him because he had run a marathon before. And the 5th goal was qualify for Boston. So that's that whole philosophy of, interim milestones, and then that, have you ever heard the term BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal that hangs out there that, if you really want to swing for the fence, that's what you go for. That was the Boston Marathon for me. I almost qualified for Boston. I ran the race in 3 hours and 37 minutes. I beat Oprah by an hour, so she wasn't even close. And when I sent that race time and the endorsement of my entire chain of command to, at the time, I think we called it PERSCOM. I'm not sure what it was necessarily that time frame in history. The general officer who had the authority to waive the regulation can't say no. I mean, the whole chain of command that supports this guy, he goes out and runs a marathon to get back in the cockpit. He's getting back on flight status, and he signed the waiver. The lesson learned is don't ever quit. I mean, there's a way. There's somebody somewhere that you can convince to make almost the impossible possible. But you can't do it if you take no for an answer. I mean, you got to find a way. And it goes back to my assessment in the 160th. They said to me, well, what do you bring to the organization? You don't have a lot of flight time. You did okay on your assessment ride. You're certainly not as attractive as the little bird guys are. Just kidding. What do you bring to the organization? And I said, I'll find a way. I mean, I'll get through it, around it, over it, under it, but if you put a mission on my shoulders, I'll find a way. And if there's one thing I could hand down to my kids, it would be that. Because it can lead to a lot of great things in life. But you can't say, okay, well, it's just not going to happen, I'm going to quit. You got to persevere and strive and struggle and overcome the obstacles in your way. And that's me in the cockpit. I flew for 5 more years, retired on my own terms in 2001 after 22 years in the military. I miss it, but moved on and get as much almost satisfaction in what I'm doing today.